Do you want to know how a man manages to remain alive in a woman's mind, even when his footsteps no longer echo in her hallway, when his voice is no longer the sound she wakes to, when his touch is nothing but memory? It is not because of a flawless face. Beauty fades, always. Time has no patience for the surface. It is not about having a sculpted body. Strength is abundant, and the world is filled with men who spend their days chasing perfection in mirrors. And it certainly isn't because of charming words, because words, though beautiful, are fleeting. They vanish in the wind, lost in memory the moment they're spoken. No, the answer lies deeper, much deeper, in a place few understand and even fewer ever master. It lies in the ability to step into the quiet corridors of a woman's unconscious mind, into the place where reason no longer governs desire, where logic surrenders to sensation, and once inside, to remain there, not as a ghost, but as a presence she can never silence. Like an echo she cannot mute, like a shadow she cannot outrun. This is the unseen battlefield. This is where legends are made. This is where obsession begins, not in the eyes, but in the mind. This is the power that Machiavelli understood, not the power of domination, but the subtle kind, the kind that whispers instead of roars, the kind that governs not by force, but by presence. Machiavelli did not write about love. He wrote about power. And yet, power is the foundation upon which all desire is built. Even in romance, even in intimacy, power is the undercurrent that shapes the tide. It is the hidden flame that ignites when a woman finds herself unable to look away, unable to forget, unable to explain why a man remains imprinted in her soul long after he is gone. That power is not in how much he gives. It is not in how often he speaks or how loudly he declares his feelings. True power, lasting power, lives in restraint. Desire is not born from what is given. It is born from what is withheld. It grows not in moments of surrender, but in the tension that arises when something is almost within reach, but never fully grasped. The mystery, the space, the silence. That is the oxygen desire needs to survive. And today, you will learn how to become that man. Not the one she remembers for a season, not the one she replaces when someone more convenient arrives, but the one she cannot forget. The one who lives inside her like a haunting. A presence that lingers not in words, but in essence. Understand, what you are about to hear is not decoration. This is not poetry for the sake of flattery. This is not superficial advice wrapped in empty promises. This is strategy. Raw, psychological strategy. The kind that once governed kings and shaped empires, now applied to the realm of human connection and desire. Because the laws of power never changed. Only the battlefield did. Power, real power, is never begged for. It is never asked. It is not demanded. It simply radiates. It exists within a man and flows outward like light from a flame. The greatest mistake men make, again and again, is chasing, is pursuing, is filling the silence with noise, trying to remind a woman that they are still there, still available, still trying. But in their desperation, they reveal their emptiness. The man who begs loses before the game begins. Machiavelli understood this with chilling clarity. And in the game of attraction, the law is the same. No woman has ever become obsessed with the man who pleads. She becomes obsessed with the one who makes her mind work, the one who pulls her attention without lifting a finger, the one who stands in his own presence like a monument to self-possession. When you no longer chase validation, when you no longer bend your spine to be accepted, something extraordinary happens. Your energy shifts. You become still. And in that stillness, there is gravity. A man who is grounded in his own worth does not need to speak often. His silence speaks louder than 1,000 words. His calmness, his stillness, creates a tension that cannot be fabricated. He becomes the question her mind cannot solve. And that question is more powerful than any answer you could ever give her. But presence alone is only the first blade in your arsenal. The second, equally sharp, is mystery. Do not reveal everything. Do not unfold all at once. Leave space. Leave gaps. Let her imagination paint the picture. Machiavelli warned that a ruler who exposes too much loses command. The same is true in attraction. A man who shares every thought, every feeling, every weakness, he may think he is being open, vulnerable, honest. But what he's really doing is robbing her mind of the need to wonder. And the mind does not cling to what it fully understands. The mind clings to what it cannot solve. So become unsolvable. A glance that lingers too long. A silence you do not explain. A moment you don't rush to fill. These are not just behaviors. They are weapons. They are puzzles. And the mind, once it begins to loop around a puzzle, cannot stop. Every small gesture becomes magnified. Every unanswered question becomes a doorway she walks through again and again in her own thoughts. This is where obsession is born, not from what is clear, but from what is clouded. Not from what is spoken, but from what is withheld. When she begins to fill the silence you leave behind with her own imagination, you have already taken root inside her. And make no mistake, this is not manipulation. This is not about becoming someone you are not. It is about restraint. It is about the discipline to hold back, to stay rooted in your own presence rather than rushing to be understood. True power does not scream. It does not dance to win attention. It whispers, it radiates, and it waits. The man who commands his own silence commands attention without trying, and the weight of that stillness, that quiet self-assuredness, carves itself into her memory like a scar made of light. This is where the most overlooked weapon of all comes into play. Absence. Not just any absence, but strategic absence. Clean, sharp, controlled. Machiavelli once wrote that fear, when subtle and invisible, is more effective than open punishment. In the realm of desire, absence serves that same purpose. Most men think they must always remain present to be remembered. That if they don't text, if they don't call, if they don't show up at every opportunity, they will be forgotten. But they are wrong. The more present they are, the more predictable they become. The more available, the more they are taken for granted. But when you withdraw, without apology, without fanfare, without noise, your absence begins to radiate more power than your presence ever did. It is not about creating drama. It is about creating weight. Because what is missing becomes magnetic. The unconscious mind craves resolution. It longs to hold what cannot be held. It burns for what slips away. And this addiction is not something you create through manipulation. It is a truth rooted in the psychology of desire itself. If you want to live inside her thoughts, you must become a man who knows how to vanish, not with fear, but with power. Silence born from strength becomes louder than 1,000 desperate pleas. This is not retreat. This is not surrender. This is a blade, honed and sharp. When you step back, not in defeat but in authority, you create a vacuum, a void. And that void becomes unbearable. She will replay memories. She will search for meanings in things you never explained. She will begin to feel the tension of your absence more than she ever felt the comfort of your presence. And when that happens, The shift has already occurred. You are no longer someone she once knew. You are someone she cannot forget. This is the secret most men never grasp. They think presence is power, that to be remembered, they must always be seen, always be heard, always be available. But real presence begins the moment you disappear with intention. It is in the silence you leave behind, in the questions that arise in your absence, that you begin to live inside her. Not as a memory, but as a tension. Not as a chapter closed, but as a book left unfinished. True mastery is never gained by volume or noise. Machiavelli taught that the most intelligent ruler is not the one who controls by force, but the one who allows his subjects to feel free, while he guides their steps invisibly from the shadows. Desire follows the same law. The man who seeks to dominate openly, who insists on being acknowledged, who demands attention, who clings, he strangles the very fire he hopes to protect. His desperation douses the flame of attraction. His need becomes the proof of his lack. But the man who governs his own emotions, who holds his ground with quiet certainty, becomes a gravitational force. He does not push. He does not pull. He simply stands. And in that stillness, everything shifts. He becomes the anchor in a storm, the silence in the noise, the mystery in a world of overexposure. This quiet strength speaks more than any performance ever could. It says, "I am whole, with or without you. I choose to be here, not because I must, but because I wish to." And that unspoken message, that invisible current of self-assurance, cuts deeper than words. It awakens her deepest, most primal fear, the fear of losing something she cannot control. And once that fear awakens, her unconscious begins to move. She will not always understand it. She may never say it aloud, but her energy bends toward you, not because you pursued, but because you held your position. This is the paradox. The man who begs for attention repels. The man who remains still becomes a question the mind cannot dismiss. The man who clings is forgotten. The one who stands still becomes unforgettable. This is not philosophy. It is psychology. Influence without force works because the mind resists pressure but yields to curiosity. It resists being pushed but leans toward what intrigues it. When she senses that you are not trying to convince her, not trying to impress her, not demanding her attention, something shifts. Her own mind begins to participate. She starts to create the story. She begins to imagine your thoughts, replay your silences, decode your pauses. She begins to choose you, not because you begged for it, but because your restraint gave her space to arrive there herself. And when a woman chooses you in her mind, on her own terms, without pressure, that bond is 10 times stronger than anything you could have forced. This is not manipulation. This is alignment. This is the result of a man who governs himself so fully that his presence naturally governs others. He doesn't need to lead with dominance. He leads with gravity. He becomes like the sun, never chasing, never pulling, yet everything orbits around him. And that kind of man, the one who is the source of his own light, is the one who becomes magnetic. This is the hidden law, the Machiavellian principle of attraction. The less you try to control, the more control you have, because the moment you stop grasping, she begins to reach. There was once a man named Daniel. For years, his life revolved around one woman. Every day began with thoughts of her. Every message was crafted to keep her attention. He was always available, always ready to comfort, always there when she called. He thought his devotion was proof of love, but to her he became background noise. Predictable, dependable, forgettable. She never wondered where he was because she always knew. She never longed for him because he never left. And this is the tragedy of countless men. They confuse availability with value. They believe giving everything will secure love. But it does not. It kills desire. And Daniel, though noble in his intent, became invisible in her world. Not because he lacked love, but because he lacked mystery. He lacked boundaries. He lacked contrast. But then came the shift. One day, Daniel looked at his reflection and saw a man who had abandoned himself to win someone else. His fire had dimmed, his body weakened, his ambition forgotten. And in that moment of clarity, he made a decision. He stopped orbiting around her and began to return to himself. He started to train, not to impress, but to reclaim strength. He traveled, not to escape, but to reconnect with his independence. He invested in his mind, his growth, his mission. The energy he once poured endlessly into her, he redirected into himself. And then, without announcement, without goodbye, he disappeared. The messages stopped. The comfort vanished. His shadow withdrew from her world. At first, she didn't notice. She assumed he would return like he always did. But days passed, then weeks, and the silence remained. And in that space, something awakened. Her mind, once indifferent, began to turn. She replayed moments she had ignored, his laughter, his gaze, the calm in his voice. His presence, now gone, became louder than ever. And for the first time, she realized something that shook her. He was no longer hers, and that realization created panic. She found herself asking questions that had no answers. Where was he? Why had he stopped? Who was he becoming? And why, after all this time, could she not stop thinking about him? Until one night, her fingers trembled over her phone. She reached out. Her words were hesitant. "I don't know what you did," she whispered. "But I can't stop thinking about you." In that moment, Daniel understood something profound. He had not played games. He had not manipulated her. He had simply reclaimed himself. And in doing so, he had become powerful, not through force, but through absence, through control, through discipline, through silence. He had stepped into the Machiavellian law, the law of the enigma, the law of absence with strength. And that changed everything. You see, the man who no longer needs to be remembered becomes unforgettable. When you stop chasing, you are chased. When you stop begging for space in her mind, she gives it to you freely. When you vanish with authority, not fear, your silence speaks with a volume your presence never could. Daniel became an enigma, not the man who gave everything, but the man who could no longer be fully possessed. And in that gap, obsession was born. Because women do not obsess over what they control. They obsess over what escapes control. They burn for the man who resists their grasp, who remains partly hidden, who refuses to be decoded. Daniel's story is not rare. It is a reflection, a mirror held to the face of every man who has lost himself in pursuit of validation. But it is also a promise that the moment you turn inward, the moment you return to your own fire, the game changes. You do not need to become someone else. You need to become whole again. Absence without strength is retreat, but absence with strength is dominance. And the man who knows how to disappear with power becomes a force that no woman can forget. His presence lives not just in her memory, but in the deepest part of her unconscious. And this is where the most dangerous truth of all is revealed. The most unforgettable man is not the one who gives everything, but the one who refuses to be fully known. This is the enigma principle, the law of unforgettable presence built not on excess, but on restraint. A man who empties himself completely, who speaks every thought, who reveals every scar and exposes every desire, thinks he is being authentic. But authenticity without boundary is vulnerability without value. It is consumption without mystery. And what is easily consumed is just as easily discarded. What is fully understood is no longer chased. What is solved is no longer studied. What is owned is no longer desired. But the man who withholds, not out of fear, but out of strength, becomes the question she cannot stop asking. He becomes the pause in her thoughts, the open-ended sentence in her internal dialogue. He is not a closed chapter. He is an unfinished story. She returns to his silence again and again, hoping for a resolution that never comes. This is not a game. This is human design. The female mind, the human mind, does not crave completion. It craves the tension of incompletion. The very act of wondering gives rise to attachment. And when her imagination begins to work for you, your presence becomes woven into her thoughts. You no longer compete for her attention. Her mind does the work for you. She replays your glances. She analyzes your stillness. She assigns meaning to the things you never said. She builds entire fantasies from the fragments you left behind. This is the riddle effect, a psychological snare where restraint becomes obsession. Because the mind clings not to what is explained, but to what resists explanation. She may forget the man who always explained himself, but she will never forget the one who left her wondering. Think of an unfinished melody, a song that ends just before the final note. It stays in your head. It loops in your mind. Neuroscience calls this the Zeigarnik effect, the tendency of the mind to fixate on what is incomplete. An interrupted story echoes louder than one that ends neatly. A conversation cut short is remembered longer than one that ends in closure. And the same law governs desire. When she believes she has fully figured you out, the story ends. But when parts remain unknown, silent, reserved, untouched, her thoughts become a maze with you at its center. And this is where your power multiplies. Because she is no longer responding to you, she is responding to her own projection of you. Her mind is chasing her own imagination, and you, merely by your restraint, have become the focus of her internal world. This is not deception. This is biology. The man who becomes a riddle is not forgotten. He is revisited, replayed, reinterpreted. And in this replaying, he becomes larger than life. You see, your goal is not to be flawless, not to be perfect. Perfection is a mask, and masks are meant to be removed. Perfection ends the story. It tells her there's nothing left to learn, nothing left to discover. And what can be fully discovered can be left behind. Instead, you must be ungraspable. Not because you are broken, but because you are whole. So whole that not every corner is on display. So powerful that your silence is as intentional as your speech. So deliberate in your energy that even your absence feels calculated, not careless. Because women do not chase the polished. They chase the paradox. The man who carries danger beneath discipline. The one who could break the rules, but doesn't. Who could lose control, but chooses not to. This contrast between potential chaos and mastered calm is what awakens the deepest layers of feminine psychology. It's not perfection she burns for. It's the thrill of contrast, the tension between fire and control, between mystery and safety. And this contrast creates a sensation she cannot escape. It whispers, with this man, anything could happen, and yet nothing will happen unless he allows it. That is power, not chaos, but command of chaos. A fire behind glass. It is the emotional duality that makes her feel both safe and unsteady, grounded but alert, desired but never fully secure. And in that tension, her emotional world is ignited. Men who are always obedient, always agreeable, always polished. They may be liked, even loved, but they are not remembered. They are predictable, and predictability breeds comfort, but not obsession. There is no contrast, no spark, no edge. They are consumed quickly and forgotten sooner. Because there is no mystery to explore, no unsolved puzzle to return to in moments of silence. But the man who walks calmly, yet carries the storm, he lingers. The man who disciplines his intensity and only lets it slip when he chooses, he is remembered not in words, but in states. In the rush she felt when he looked at her a certain way, in the stillness of his presence when others were chaotic, in the contradiction of danger and safety held in the same gaze. This is not performance, it is not arrogance, it is self-possession, and it is unforgettable. Think of it again like fire. Uncontained fire destroys. It burns through everything. It is feared, but not respected. But fire that is contained, that is what we gather around, what we seek for warmth, what we admire from a distance. Its danger is not gone. It is simply mastered. And that mastery is what makes it magnetic. The same is true for you. Uncontrolled aggression repels. Aimless rebellion is childish. But controlled intensity, power with restraint, makes you unforgettable. Because she sees that you could break rules, but you don't. That you could lose control, but you won't. And that choice, not the ability but the control over it, is where true power lies. It is the balance of two opposing energies, edge and elegance, fire and calm, dominance and grace. And when both forces live inside one man, no woman forgets him. He becomes the paradox she cannot solve, the tension she cannot resolve, the question that repeats long after the conversation ends. And it's in this paradox that obsession is born, because she feels something deeper than desire. She feels the pull of a man who does not need her to remember him, but who she cannot forget. That is the Machiavellian imprint, not made through noise or spectacle, but through the unshakable energy of a man who governs himself. She does not remember your words. She remembers the weight of your gaze, the calm in your posture, the space between your gestures. She remembers how she felt in your presence, the safety wrapped in tension, the freedom wrapped in mystery. She remembers the contrast, because the human mind is not addicted to comfort. It is addicted to complexity, to questions, to depth. That's why perfection is a lie. It's sterile, it's forgettable, it's easily replaced. But contrast is eternal. Be dangerous, be mysterious, but above all, be in control. Because the man who balances both becomes not just desirable, but addictive. The man who lives in that space between fear and trust, desire and distance, comfort and chaos. That is the man who carves his mark not in memory, but in the unconscious. And that is the final lesson. Power is not in being always correct. It is not in being always available. It is not in being sweet or safe or flawless. It is in being the man she cannot decode, the one who reveals enough to ignite, but never enough to extinguish the flame, the one